Yeah, but so I'm looking at the waiting room, and yes, you're there. So I've added you. Let's talk on. Recording in progress. Okay. Hello. Hello, I can see you clearly, and you're on mute.
Right, right. Can you hear me now? All good?
If you could just test.
All right. So can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, I can hear you clearly.
All right. Excellent. How's your son and wife? All good?
Yes, yes, everything is good right now. In terms of the pandemic and all. Okay, so I will also respond on behalf of all the participants.
Right.
To add in more interactive. Pollution is one of the answers.
Okay, pollution. All right. Wonderful. Something else?
Yeah, Shreya, you have raised hand. You can unmute yourself and respond.
I think deforestation.
Okay, deforestation. Excellent. Any more? Climate change. I can see someone written climate change. Perfect. One or two more?
Anything else?
Any more?
Pollution, deforestation. Rivers being impacted due to dams.
Okay, okay. All right. Rivers being impacted through dams. Now, how many of these environmental issues that you've listed out, can you connect back to what you eat? Do you understand my question? We've listed out environmental issues like climate change, deforestation, pollution, rivers being affected by dams. So according to you, how many of you can connect these to the kind of food habits that you have or the foods that you eat? Can you make the links between these environmental issues and what's on your plate?
How connected? How do you connect?
Because the kind of mass production that happens of meat.
So one is mass production of meat.
Okay.
The other one is
mass production of meat. You're connecting it to what is he connecting mass production of meat?
Climate
with?
change.
Global warming.
Global warming and climate change.
All right. All right. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Plastic packaging pollution because of plastic packaging of food items.
Right. Then
Oil is one more in terms of deforestation. A lot of palm oil plantations are made where there were forests.
For processed food. Right. Right. Then there was being dammed. Can you connect that with the food on your plate?
Mostly with irrigation, as in dams are made with the promise that will irrigate places where there is less water and water guzzling.
To grow our food, basically to grow our food. Dams are a system we created to allow us to grow our food, right? And so, even without recognizing it, understanding it, making the connection, food shapes our life in more ways than we understand. Food shapes our life, personally. Food affects our bodies. Food shapes our societies, how our societies are, whether it's equitable, inequitable, obese, starving, malnutrition, and food shapes our environment. How we sometimes forget that, you know, food is our relationship to nature. Nature is for our food, and therefore how and what we eat directly affects how we use nature and how we have an impact on nature. And so the world of food is very complex. It has many overlaps, many interconnections, just like life, you know. If you come to think of it, food not only feeds us, not only gives us life, food is life. And so if you put on the lenses and if you see the world through the lenses of food, you will find that some of the most daunting environmental issues, some of the most complicated issues that seem out of an average person's range to solve, kind of seem pliable, you know, doable. Changing the way you look at food, changing the way you eat food, changing the way you grow food, you know, can have a huge impact. While having a conversation yesterday with Maji, we talked about, you know, focusing on, because you have been talking about issues on energy, to focus on a few issues like McDonaldization, food miles. And I thought I would give you a brief history of, not history, I mean, food is a very complicated subject. And so today's 1 hour's conversation is just going to be like scratching the surface, you know, getting you curious and interested to probably, you know, do more research, learn more on your own, and discover the many connections food has in our lives. Momati, can I request you to help me with a PPT? Or if you can allow me to share the screen, I can do it myself, whichever one is.
Purvi ji, yeah, we lost your audio for a few seconds there, and I'll just also want to update the participant that Purvi ji is in a rural area, and the connection might go up and down a bit.
Right.
So we apologize for that. If you could just go back to your last couple of sentences.
I was saying, if you could help me with the PPT that I shared on the email, or if you can allow me to share the screen. There were just 3 slides that I wanted to share with the participants.
Yes.
If it's easier for you.
Yes, yes. I will make you the co-host.
Right.
I'll make you the co-host.
Okay.
You can now share your screen.
All right. Just give me 1 minute. So I just wanted to give you an overview of what a food system is like. Just give me 1 minute. My PowerPoint is opening up. Yes. All right. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes,
is my screen visible? So normally So normally when one looks at the food system, this is a simplistic way to understand the food system, that you produce the food, then you distribute it, you process it, it goes to the market, one purchases it, one consumes it, then there's some sort of waste management, and then that's a complete loop that the food system works on. However, the food system is as complicated as this. The food system this is the global food system. You know, we move towards globalization, and, you know, we've moved towards the world being one big city or one big community. And this is a global food system. To comprehend how the food moves around the world and how the global food system sometimes can take a lifetime to understand the many nuances. And this global food system has kind of led us here. This is where we are at the moment. We are moving towards McDonaldization of the world, which basically means homogenization of the kind of foods we eat, homogenization of the cultures that we have, of the ideas we have, creating monocultures of mind, as Vandana Shiva calls it. But before we go into that, I'll just stop sharing now. Is that clear so far? Would anyone want me to stop and explain or clarify something for you, or shall I continue?
Continue.
Yeah. So before we go into that, I wanted to step back a little and talk about how did we get to this industrial food system that we have right now. Anybody have an idea about, the time frame or how we got in our history, how we got from, subsistence farming, communities being self-sufficient to a global industrial food system where machines and, everything is seen in terms of an industry. Food gets converted from something that nourishes you to a commodity. Does anyone know the time frame or what brought about that change in our history, or when in our history? Would anyone have an idea? Like to share?
Can be like because of globalization and during the era when people started colonizing, like Britishers and these colonizing that they started.
So historically, that is before that. So one of the answers it's coming up probably during the colonial period when.
Right.
Because globalization in one way. Industrial revolution plus colonization. So the other answer is industrial revolution plus colonization.
Absolutely. Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. I mean, globalization of food has been going on for as long as we remember. I mean, if you think about it, Columbus was looking for us, was looking for pepper. And so he was traveling the world to come to us, and he discovered America, right? And so in a sense, food has been globalized forever. But the second answer is very correct. The Industrial Revolution in the late 1900s and the early 20th century was the turning point for agriculture. 2-3 things happened at the same time. One, we brought in a lot of machinery, especially in the Western world. A lot of machinery was brought into agriculture. And so a lot of agrarian communities were going into urban communities. The second thing that happened was that Haber and Bosch, 2 scientists, discovered a method of using a lot of pressure. I have it written here. I don't exactly know the scientific way, but what they did was they used a high temperature, high pressure, and to fossil fuel, and they turned it into ammonia, which is urea, ammonia nitrate, nitrogen fertilizer, which is used as a replacement of natural fertilizer in farms. And so it was in the early 20th century, the discovery of all of these chemicals and fertilizers that brought in the agrarian industrialization. The second phase happened was at the end of the world. A lot of companies that were making chemicals, for the warfare. They were making explosive, they were making nerve agents. When the war ended, they kind of ran out of business. They had to find alternative markets for their chemicals. And so by making minor alterations to these chemicals, these nerve agents and explosives, were turned into pesticides and fertilizers, which we use today for growing our food. And so in a sense, the end of the Second World War was the tipping point, and it brought about a revolution in the southern part of the world. Does anyone know what that revolution was called in India?
Green revolution is like.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. And so with the introduction of Green Revolution, lots of farmers from India were encouraged to sort of give up subsistence farming, give up, intercropping, multi-cropping, polycropping, farming, and were encouraged through subsidies and through support and through financial incentives to switch towards monocultures of rice. And talking about the Green Revolution happened to us during the period of the Green Revolution, and the farmers' protest at this point is a big, complex discussion. And so I'm just going to leave this here, saying that this was the beginning of the industrial agricultural pattern, which started a trend towards industrialization of food in very many different areas. And then I'm going to move on towards McDonaldization of the world. So at this point, can I answer any questions or queries, or would you like to share anything with me? All good so far?
Yeah, all good. Yep. You can continue.
When the Second World War ended, there was again this thing that during the war, a lot of processed food was designed for the soldiers. The food had to be easy to make, it had to be nutritious, it had to require bare minimum essentials to cook it. It needed to have a longer shelf life so the soldiers could carry the food with them and cook and eat it wherever they were. Now, the other thing that had happened in the Western world while the war was going on, that since all the men had gone away to war, the women had come to fort and taken over the jobs that the men were doing. And so once the men returned, there was this big dilemma, right? The women weren't sure whether they wanted to go back to being housemakers or they wanted to continue being in the working areas. And this was also the churning and the kind of beginning of the feminist movement, where a lot of women were asserting their rights, were asserting their rights to vote, were asserting their rights to be in the workplace. And so the food industry very cleverly placed themselves saying, look, we have this food. We designed it in a way that it's completely nutritious meal for your family. You don't have to toil over the kitchen for days together. All you have to do is open the lid, pop it in the microwave, voila, a fantastic meal for you and your family is ready, right? And so they use this opportunity to get cooking, which was in many ways, in many cultures and in many communities, an expression of love, an expression of doing something together as a community, to being seen as a task, to be seen as something that was below your dignity, a waste of your time. You'd rather be doing something else than cooking for your family. Your time was well spent doing something else than cooking. Fast food is a beginning of the industrial food movement as well. And one of the restaurants that took the major advantage and benefited from it the most is McDonald's. So in the 1930s and the early late 50s, there was a restaurant which is called the drive-in, where you have a lot of these, even in India, we have these systems right now. I don't know in your parts of the world, but in Ahmedabad, where I am from, we do have that. You drive to a place, you sit in your car, and people from restaurants around you come with a menu and deliver the food to you in the car itself, right? And so this required a lot of manpower for McDonald's. They were doing very well with it, but they wanted to cut costs. They wanted to simplify. And so this is what they did. They brought the factory back to the restaurant. And so what they did was they mechanized the whole cooking system. So they reduced the number of items that they were selling. So they're not doing a lot of variety. And they trained people to do one job over and over and over again. Now, could you think of what could be the problem? I mean, so what? Isn't that easy if some person does one thing over and over again? Isn't that a good thing to do? What do you think about that? I mean, it's a successful model. Could you see problems with it?
So one, in that sense, you're saying, so one, the reason that they're doing that is what the participant is trying to say is the problem, that you reduce employment.
Right, reduce employment. That is one thing. What could be the other possible problem with it?
One, the idea that is coming is that the quality might reduce and efficiency might reduce.
Okay, quality, efficiency. What else? What else?
There's no personal growth in it. It's just a repetitive task. So
absolutely correct. Absolutely. Basically, when you
it reduces their mobility,
right,
and you are easily replaceable.
Absolutely correct. My God, you have a smart crowd there. Very, very smart people, young people.
And Ashish on the chat is writing about psychological issues.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you notice, what kind of people do McDonald's usually hire? Have you thought about that?
Younger people.
Not in India. I'm not asking you to look at people they hire in India, but because we're looking at the Western model at the moment, can you think?
Students is one answer.
Right, absolutely. Students, immigrant workers, people with not a lot of opportunities to get a job somewhere else. And so one of the main problems of that we are seeing now after the 40s, after 50 years, one of the main problems with this kind of industrial model is that you de-skill a person. When a person has to do one thing over and over again, like all of you mentioned, it's easy to replace them. There's no personal growth. You don't have skills that you can, sell yourself and say that, I was working at McDonald's and, I'm skilled at making the burger, because the only skill you have is probably applying butter on the buns, nothing else, right? And so that is seen as a problem. But when McDonald's is one of the biggest buyers of beef in the country, when McDonald's is the biggest buyers of potatoes in the country, when it's the biggest buyer of apples and lettuce and tomatoes, and one of the things that McDonald's promoted was uniformity, conformity, and cheapness. That no matter where you go in the world, right, you expect your burger to taste just the same. Have any of you experienced this, expected this with your foods, not just at McDonald's, but Subway or Burger King, the brands? Do you expect, whether you're eating it in Delhi or you're eating it in New York, you kind of want your food to taste similar when you walk into these joints? Have you experienced that? You've expected that? What could be the, what do you think could be the possible problem with requiring that taste and similarity at all times. What do you envisage as potential problems with that system?
The local food of that place is getting destroyed. The local
One of the answers coming is that local food kind of is kind of not valued that much because of that.
Right. But that's going to happen with the organization promoting itself. So that is happening at a different level, because or it's not because of the methods McDonald's uses to cook its food, but it's how it projects its food, right? A lot of young people in India look at McDonald's as aspirational food, as something that they're part of a global community, that somebody in New York also goes to McDonald's and I'm also eating McD's in India. So I'm part of the global community. That's correct. It does have an effect on local food in that manner, because a lot of young people undermine local food and value this food more. But I'm thinking more of could you consider what could be some of the business issues, economic issues, society issues, environmental issues when a company requires so much homogeneous materials. Forget to value our culture. Absolutely correct. There's not much love into the food. It is a machine product. Absolutely correct. So let me try and explain it to you like this. How many of you have eaten at McDonald's? Can we have a show of hands?
4, 5, almost everyone. Yeah, almost everyone in the room.
Absolutely
All 8 to 10.
correct. Ashish is spot on when he says diversity is reduced, and I will come to that. P has a more monoculture plantation. Oh my God, this group is so smart. I'm so happy to be here. That's absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. So when you're eating at McDonald's, when you're eating those French fries, those bouquet of French fries, which are long and, crunchy, and so you need a particular variety of potatoes for that, right? Not every potato will give you that flavor, will give you that lasty crunchiness. If the potato has too much sugar, it will go brown. If it has less sugar, it will taste starchy. So like mentioned by Ashish and by P, diversity. So in the world, we might have, say, 10,000 varieties of potatoes, but because the demand and McDonald's is asking farmers to grow a particular variety of potatoes through contract farming and other reasons, the diversity in nature out there goes down, right? I mean, if you look around the world, the kind of food grains that we're eating have come down to only 6 and 7. Shall we count the kind of food grains we're eating? Predominantly eating rice,
Rice, wheat, of course, the
right?
women say.
Then
Grain. Corn, I think.
corn, one more.
Millets.
Some millets.
Very few millets. Soya, we eat a lot of soya. If you eat
Soya.
processed food, you're eating a lot of soya. And so I'm going to quickly look at the chat, and some of the answers here are brilliant. It creates and reinforces economic inequality and power imbalances. Ashish, can you explain that further? Would you like to and share with us what you mean by reinforces inequality and power imbalances?
It's like when a lot of people are going to only a few food outlets, formal outlets, they are kind of not giving a chance to the local kind of suppliers or the local outlets, right? So in that way,
Absolutely.
economic inequality goes up, and also it leads to power imbalance, because if too many people are going to McDonald's, that means McDonald's would require to sell a lot of, say, burgers or French fries.
Absolutely.
Now, if McDonald's needs to buy a lot of potatoes, that means farmers lose their power. Um, at, I mean, they have less power as compared to the power that McDonald's has as a buyer, because that becomes a bulk buyer.
Absolutely correct. It leads to monopolies in a sense, right? Because McDonald's will want their potatoes graded a certain way. They will want them transported to their company. They don't want to be bothered with anything. So, hamara kaam ho jana chahiye. So, what will happen? Start off with farmers, growing these potatoes, but they can't meet the standards of McDonald's. And slowly, gradually, you will have companies that will, act like go in, and slowly, gradually, monopolies start. And so then for McDonald's, you will have certain group of that will grow the potatoes for them and give it to them. And so the same with, growing animals or growing apples. So we have biodiversity that's adversely affected. We have monopolies going on. They will discourage small and medium, farmers and producers and suppliers, because they will want huge supplies. They don't want to deal with small numbers. They want big numbers, right? So monopolies in that. And as Ashish very rightly said, inequity, right? Inequity. Have these big monopolies deciding, controlling, and managing what are the kind of prices and what are the kind of systems that you will have in. And if you can't keep up as a small farmer to the contractual agreements, or can't meet their standards, then you're off the list. And then where is the market for you to supply the potatoes that you've been growing for McDonald's, right? So in that sense, it affects the whole chain. Eating a lot of processed food affects your health individually. Eating a lot of processed food affects the environment. It affects the biodiversity. It contributes to, deforestation. It contributes to climate change. It contributes to food miles. All these other, palm oil, like you said, a lot of forests are being cut out because palm oil is a cheaper, more stable material to cook all the processed food in. And so it affects all what seemingly seems very simple. You're just going to McDonald's, having some fries with a friend. It's clean, you're loving it. Repercussions of what you decide to eat that day has, a lot of links. It's not just about eating those fries and, forgetting about them, because they're interconnected to a lot of things, and you have an impact on a lot of different factors. Then Priya has written commercialization of agriculture. Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Millets are vanishing. Redmi said. Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. So you're all very spot on with these issues. And therefore, something as simple as wanting your burgers to taste the same everywhere you go, like I said, has a huge repercussion on the society, your health, and the environment. This leads to another issue, that whenever we think about agriculture, or whenever we think about food, and whenever we think about sustainability, we do not consider okay, so the point here I'm trying to make is that when you think of climate change, and when you think of what is contributing to climate change, what are some of the first things that come to your mind? What is contributing to climate change? What are some of the things that come to your mind?
Deforestation.
Deforestation, okay.
Greenhouse gases.
Greenhouse gases.
Oil spills and pollution in general.
We are seeing a devastating one right now, aren't we?
travel as in international and
Right,
airplane, the
right.
amount of like just travel.
Transportation. Absolutely. Absolutely correct. And this is what comes to everyone's mind. Now let's go back to industrialization of agriculture. And let's go back to how we farm. Does anyone remember how we farm? What has the Green Revolution taught us to do?
One of the things is that you have to use fertilizers and pesticides. Like that's a must.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then what are fertilizers and pesticides made of?
Natural composting.
Chemicals.
And what are those chemicals made of, Akshay?
I want to say that I want to use natural composting instead of fertilizer. And
Sorry, I'm unable to understand what you're saying.
composting, ma'am, composting.
Sorry, Mohammadji, can you understand?
Akshay, can you type it in because you have some background noise? We are not able to clearly understand.
Okay, sure.
Can you type it in the chat box, please? So chemicals and fertilizers, what are they made of? Does anyone remember? Haber and Bosch. Yes. What is ammonia made of? Haber and Bosch created ammonia from.
Mostly fossil fuels is.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Natural gas is made out of natural gas. And so even at the global level, it was only last year that the IPPC, the International Panel, I hope I'm correct, it's International Planner on blah, 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 climate
IPCC.
change. Yeah.
IPCC, International Climate Change.
Right, you know what I mean, right? It's only last year that they recognized and acknowledged the role agriculture and the kind of agriculture we are practicing. So if you look at food production, even if you forget the transportation, even if you forget the cooling, and if you know, the cold storages and the retailing, if you just look at how we produce food around the world, forget deforestation, all of that, the basic food production contributes more than 20 to 30% of the global greenhouse gases. And it's because of the way we do agriculture, because of the chemical agriculture that we are practicing today, right? And so interesting things about that is that if we, instead of subsidizing chemical agriculture, if we support farmers, it's very interesting. Someone's already written here that Redmi, I'm going to say Redmi because I don't read a name here, that Green Revolution has impacted soil diversity adversely, right? Soil is the foundation of our life. A lot of us don't recognize the role of soil in our existence, right? Soil, a handful of soil has more than 1 billion microorganisms that help us grow our food. And once you start using chemicals and fertilizer, you kill those microorganisms. And hence, you get into this vicious cycle where you apply this chemical and fertilizers once, and then you have to continue to use it again because you've killed the soil and you need some side to help grow your crop. And the problem with using chemical and fertilizers is that the need for it is not static. So if, say, when you shift from natural to chemical, you might require 1 bag of urea and it will give you 26 tons of grains. Now, to maintain that 26 tons, every year, the amount of urea that you have to put in. So do you understand? It does not increase your production every year. to maintain it, the input that you put, the chemical input that you have to put, keeps on increasing. So if you look system, and if you look at how we are growing food, and if you look at the whole loop, we are using a lot of oil. We're using a lot of fossil oil. And if you understand peak oil, then you already know that we've crossed the peak oil point, right? We have reached the point where all the fossil fuel in the soil, we've crossed that. It's going to be downhill from there. So what do you think, what do you think about this agricultural system that we practice right now? What do you think about it in terms of environmental sustainability? What do you think about it in terms of personal health, in terms of environmental health? What do you think one should look at and think of? Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Using fertilizers, using a lot of urea creates a high nitrification in the water. The groundwater is polluted. Aquifers are polluted. Absolutely correct. Organic farming, Sikkim is one example. Absolutely correct. And how does one consider farming from an point of view? Have you guys switching to a more permanent system? So Shreya, what could be a more permanent system? Would permaculture be a more permanent system according to you?
Yes. I wrote that in the comments. I do feel like permaculture would be more of working with the environment in order to get back uh, what you need in much more abundance, and also giving back to the environment. So you complete the cycle in a way and don't stop it like um, what fertilizers do to the environment.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct.
Would you be touching on what is permaculture for others, like in the room?
So this is how I see it, but I could be wrong. Permaculture basically means permanent agriculture. And so what you basically do is that you replicate an ecosystem. So rather than having a monoculture farm where you're just growing rice and wheat, you have an ecosystem where you're growing a little bit of trees, you have a little bit of crop, you have animals, you have a water body. You create, it's a design system of growing your own food. But this is how I personally feel that permaculture, natural farming, organic farming, rishi kheti, agroecology, these are all different terms. The idea is the same. There are different tools and techniques, but the idea is same, that one goes back to the traditional system of farming where we relied on living organisms, where we had a complete loop where everything that was grown in some form went back to the soil. However, what do you drip irrigation? Right. Permaculture helps in establishing and enhancing our natural ecosystems. Absolutely correct. But the kind of here, I have another, sort of question to put forth to you. Have any of you heard of ethanol? Have you guys heard of ethanol?
Yes.
Yes.
We've heard
And
about it, but not sure about what it is.
right. So ethanol is seen as an alternative fuel. So does anyone kind of have an understanding of how one makes ethanol? How it's made?
Ma'am, could you repeat? Just I couldn't follow what you just.
Right. Is seen as an alternative to current use of fossil fuel, as in substitute So would any of you have any idea of how ethanol is made?
Last year during the pandemic, they had this idea of making hand sanitizer using excess rice stock.
Right. So it's
Some crops.
something like that. Ethanol is used making corn, sugarcane, excess, excess corn, sugarcane, sugar beets, barley, sorghum, all of these crops. But then, can you see the problem with ethanol being an answer to sustainability and a solution or an alternative to fossil fuels?
Yeah, I'll just want to paraphrase. Basically, ethanol as an idea has come up. Instead of drilling for oil and then using it to make petrol and diesel, you make biofuels. So you grow the crop and then using some industrial process, convert that energy of the crop into a fuel, which is ethanol. So yeah, what is the problem in that thinking? It's good now you're growing your own fuel.
Isn't a lot of wastage?
One answer is that isn't it a lot of wastage in doing this?
Right. That is what some of the activist lobbies say, that a lot of land that has been used to grow ethanol could be used to grow food crops, right? Food for people. Absolutely. What could be the other potential problem with this? Any ideas?
I'd read somewhere that ethanol is also produced by fermenting the sugarcane molasses.
Absolutely.
So in that case, that emits quite a lot of carbon dioxide.
Right.
So when we're talking about producing ethanol, it's directly impacting the environment and
Right.
emission of
So the burning of the molasses is producing the problem, right?
yes,
So
carbon
again,
dioxide is emitted.
right. So again, back to fossil fuels, circular usage. Absolutely correct, Ashish. It goes back to the monoculture problem. Absolutely correct. But I would like you to step back and go back to how we grow our food at the moment.
Using more of the same to grow.
So you're using fossil fuels to grow crops to stop using fossil fuels. Do you understand how we're looking at the whole picture in parts, then rather than stepping back and looking at the whole? Do you understand what I mean? You're using fossil fuels to grow corn, to grow sugar beets, to grow sugarcane, as Deblina mentioned, burn the molasses to get the ethanol out of it. And so this is what is happening with a lot of environmental issues that we're looking at. Say, supposing we haven't touched on food miles yet, but supposing if you wanted to impact food miles, I'm sure most of you are aware because you're such a smart bunch here today, that is the distance your food travels from the farm to your plate. And so it's a measure to calculate the environmental sustainability of your food. Now, supposing basically a vicious cycle, absolutely correct. So supposing if you wanted to reduce food miles, what are some of the options that you would think of? What are the alternatives that come to your mind? Say you are getting Washington apples, flying all the way from Washington to New Delhi or, other parts of India. What do you do if you want to reduce food miles? What are the kind of ideas that you have in mind?
What does that mean? So one is eat local, which we should dissect. What does that even mean? Eat?
Absolutely.
Seasonal is one. Seasonal food.
Right. See, the whole idea of, so this whole idea that there are no seasons, that the seasons don't matter, was brought to us by supermarkets, right? When supermarkets first came into the Americas in the early 50s, they wanted to provide the customers with a range of things. They wanted them to walk in and have the convenience of eating whatever they wanted, wherever they wanted. And they created these systems whereby anytime you walked into the supermarket, you would get, foods from around the world. So for a fair amount of years, apples would be grown in Washington. They would be flown to China to be washed and packaged, and then flown back to England to be sold. And for a lot of economics, that made a lot of financial viability, because labor was cheaper in China, and it made sense to be able to do that. But now with climate change and looking at the greenhouse gases, we're seeing food miles is a problem. There is another aspect of food miles that a lot of times, and this rises from our idea and our desire to have access to whatever we wish, and this seasonality, is growing things in your environment by creating a micro environment. So you have the greenhouses, and you have the poly houses, and you have the energy houses. And so in a lot of times, to avoid food miles, say to get tomatoes from Spain or somewhere, a lot of the cold countries will set up greenhouses in their own areas, and they will be eating local tomatoes. Now, would they be energy efficient? Would that be a viable answer to not flying your fruit around?
Why no?
Because again, you're creating an artificial environment to grow something that doesn't grow here. So, and greenhouse spaces or such artificial spaces itself are very harmful to the environment. So it makes completely logical.
Are you getting it?
No, unfortunately,
Purvi, did you?
No, unfortunately,
Yeah, she's far away.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what Vanshika is saying is that it is an artificial environment, and it is not the same. So we should not. Basically, that is what you're saying, no?
Yeah.
So it's an artificial environment. Shouldn't be doing.
I agree with her. And a lot of times what happens is that it might be more efficient to fly your tomatoes from Spain than the amount of energy that you spend to grow them locally, right? And so again, this whole idea comes about, how do you calculate? How do you measure? What is the issue you're looking at? Are you looking at it from a fragmented point of view? Are you looking at it, stepping back and looking at the whole? More than anything else, I think it comes down to how we look at food, how we value food. What is the role of food in our lives, right? It starts from the beginning at that point. And unless we're able to question that, unless we're able to answer that, unless we're able to understand, is food something that's convenient, easy, out of the way, then, this kind of a system is something that is going to continue to work, and that is going to be something that we're going to be dependent on. Talking about seasonal produce, group members, most of you probably recognize seasons. A lot of young people that I work with, when I ask them, do you know, it's winter, what are the seasonal crops that one grows in Gujarat in winter? Not just young people, even because I'm a farmer and a lot of people, get in touch with me to talk about agricultural issues, they will call me in summer and, peak 44 degrees is how hot it gets in Ahmedabad. And they will ask me, how shall I grow my tomatoes? I don't know if most of you get this joke, but I'm sure Mohammed ji will get it, because tomatoes don't grow in summer in 45 degrees, right? It grows only in winter. When I was a child, summer was the most boring season because you would eat only lauki and turai and all these water insipid vegetables, and a lot of pulses as your substitute for not having vegetables. But a lot of young people now don't have the orientation of what is seasonality, what is local, right? Even in India, we say, oh, we have a lot of rural areas around us, mostly eat local. 50 kilometers से तो ज़्यादा हमारे यहाँ नहीं travel करता है, right? These are the assumptions we make. लेकिन अगर आप देखेंगे तो some of the top foods that we depend on, say potatoes, onion, dhania, tomatoes, they travel an average 2,500 to 3,000 kilometers so that they are available in all supermarkets, with all thela wala, with all vegetable vendors around India. So it's not like we don't have food miles in India as well, because our idea of what is food, because of the kind of food palette that is changing, because of the kind of food habits that are changing, the is changing and to give us that, right? So when we think about sustainability and food, the core point that we have to go back to is, what does food mean to you? And what is the role that food plays in your life? Once we figure that out, once we understand that, then the rest of the questions fall into place and are easy to answer. Yes, I'm just going to quickly look at this. Can you speak for a few minutes in your native tongue, I hope, and me in Hindi? फिरोज जी, मेरी नेटिव टंग तो गुजराती है, मेरी हिंदी बहुत अच्छी नहीं है, लेकिन आई एम सॉरी, आप मैं दोनों में बात कर सकती हूँ। हिंदी और गुजराती थोड़ा मिक्स हो जाता है कभी कभी। तो बेसिकली आज हमने सिर्फ फूड और एनवायरनमेंट के इश्यू में सिर्फ सरफेस स्क्रैच किया है। हमने होपफुली, मैंने आप में थोड़ी क्यूरियोसिटी डेवलप करवाई है कि आपको इच्छा हो, कि आपको और जानने की इच्छा हो और आप और बातें करें और इसके बारे में रिसर्च करें। बहुत सारे लोग आज के जो पार्टिसिपेंट्स यहाँ हैं ऑलरेडी बहुत इंटेलिजेंट है, उनको अपने फूड और सिस्टम्स के बारे में बहुत मालूम है। पर मेरा ये मानना है कि हम फूड को ना ही छोटे टुकड़ों में देखें कि भाई हमें पोल्यूशन कम करना है तो इसके लिए इसको हिट करें, डिफॉरेस्टेशन को स्टॉप करना है तो इसको हिट करें, क्योंकि ये सारा मिला हुआ है, इंटरकनेक्टेड है, मल्टीडिसिप्लिनरी है। अगर आप कोई भी इश्यू ले और थोड़ा सा ध्यान से उसको एनालाइज करें, कहीं ना कहीं वो अपने फूड के साथ कनेक्टेड है ही, राइट? हम कैसे खाते हैं वो कनेक्टेड है ही। तो उसकी वजह से हमें हमारे फूड के बारे में सोच बदलनी पड़ेगी, हमें फूड के बारे में हमारा नजरिया बदलना पड़ेगा। फूड क्या है, किसको हम अच्छा मानते हैं, किसको हम बुरा मानते हैं, कल्चरली हमारे लिए क्या अप्रोप्रिएट है, हम किसको महत्व देते हैं, हमारे स्टेटस में क्या आता है या हमारी इच्छा को क्या करता है। तो हमने आज प्रोसेस फूड की बात ही नहीं की। अगर हम फूड की बात करते हैं तो दुनिया में जो प्रोसेस फूड का जो दौर आ गया है, उसकी वजह से जो हेल्थ पे असर होती है, यंग लोगों पे असर होती है, पर्यावरण पे तो होती ही है, सोसाइटी पे तो होती ही है। तो मतलब बहुत सारे लेवल्स है, जो जैसे अनियन को पील करते हैं ना, जितना हम पील करें उतने लेयर्स फूड में निकल के आते हैं। तो politics. So I hope ये session आपके लिए meaningful रहा, और आपके पास कोई questions है तो I will be very happy to answer them.
So Purvi ji, should we we have reached the 6 o'clock mark. The
Right.
next half an hour we can just keep the floor open as many as questions come. So the first question is from Vanchika, who's the participant in our program over here.
Right.
She will go ahead.
Yeah, hello. I have two questions. They're pretty noob questions, but like, what do you think when you look at intra-country, like within the country, the idea of food miles within the country, for example, things are going from Gujarat to Delhi or from South India to North India and stuff like this. The second question is in this era of globalization, and how do we look at this idea of local food when everything is globalized and we have like you were saying, there's no seasonal food now. So what is something that is towards the solution, or like that changes our perspective towards this idea of seasonal food and locally grown food? You have these two questions.
Absolutely wonderful questions. Thank you so much for them. What a bright young lady you are. I would have never thought of these questions when I was your age. Here is the thing. What we consider essential is built part of a narrative that is sold to us. One of the things that we haven't discussed here today is that food has become a commodity. Industries, the advertisement expense of Coca-Cola alone for 1 year is more than $2 billion, right? And so their ability to make you believe that you a meat without Coca-Cola is incomplete is a reality. Young people losing the understanding of seasonality is not a result of ignorance, but is a result of the food environment that exists out there, right? आपको कैसे फूड प्रेजेंट किया जा रहा है, राइट? आपको क्या अच्छा है, क्या बुरा है, वो कैसे प्रेजेंट किया जा रहा है, और सबकॉन्शियसली आप इन्फ्लुएंस हो रहे हो और आप उसको अपनी लाइफ में इनकॉर्पोरेट करते हो विदाउट इवन अंडरस्टैंडिंग कि ये आपका सोशल इंजीनियरिंग हो गया, राइट? क्योंकि इतना सटली होता है, बहुत हमें समझ में भी नहीं आता है. तो एक ये बड़ा रोल है. इसीलिए अगेन एक बेसिक क्वेश्चन टू अंडरस्टैंड कि आपका फूड के साथ रिलेशनशिप क्या है, आप फूड को कैसे देखते हो, आपका फूड के साथ इन द सेंस आप फूड के पास कब जाते हो, कैसे रिलेट करते हो. इज फूड इज योर रिस्पाइट व्हेन यू आर एंग्री, food is your release when you're in a bad mood, is food something that you get together with friends, so food is everywhere, but since it's everywhere, we don't look at it, we take it for granted, right? We see it in just something in some parts, and that stops us from looking at the whole. So that is one view I have, that learning to recognize the role of food in your life, and then navigating the social engineering moves that organizations and companies make. So that look at it. कि ये global market में, globalization में local का मतलब क्या होता है, right? Globalization तक हमेशा होगा, right? It will always globalize. You can't step back and say कि ठीक है, मैंने अपना दरवाजा बंद कर दिया, कोई आएगा नहीं, कोई जाएगा नहीं. But to say that I will only eat Washington apples would be not depending on local. Eating apples, Himachali apples, when they come in season. You understand what I mean? In India itself, we have so many different geographical zones, right? And each have their special variety. हर area में उनका specialization. जैसे गुजरात में ही हमारे एक saying है Bar gawe bodhi badlai. So if you go for 12 kilometers, the language, food, clothes, everything changes, right? So locally also one would have to define what works best for them. There are certain things that have become an important part of our lives. Say, for example, potatoes. Does anyone know where potatoes originally are from? No? Anybody know where potatoes originally are from? No? Well, they're from Peru, and the British introduced them to us. Does anyone know where chilies are from? तीखा तो हमें सबको बहुत पसंद है ना, तीखा के बिना तो हम खा ही नहीं सकते, है ना? So मिर्ची भी हमारे,
I guess Mexico.
Right, absolutely correct. तो मिर्ची भी हमारे यहाँ इंट्रोड्यूस की ब्रिटिशर्स ने, so can you imagine what would be our spice palette before the British introduced mirchi to us, right? So these things have globalized. But now if you think that eat is avocado, right? And so the avocado has to fly all the way, or that the millet that you eat is quinoa. When I eat, I only like quinoa salad. This whole idea of food has to change. The whole idea of good food has to change. If you look at any magazine and pick up a diet plan, you will see a lot of salads in it, right? Now, I am someone who lives in Gujarat, and we will not get any lettuce leaves or any broccoli or anything like that in summer, right? Gujaratis don't eat salad. We eat onions and tomato, and that is our salad, right? So it's a cultural, it's again comes back to McDonaldization of the world. It again comes back to homogenization as to what is healthy food, what is a good food. If you look at all these magazines, you will see sometimes they will say egg yolk बहुत अच्छा होता है, फिर कहते हैं egg whites बहुत अच्छा होता है, egg yolk तो खराब होता है, फिर third phase में आता है पूरा अंडा खाओ बहुत अच्छा होता है. So it changes. So for me, the best way is what is culturally being told to me. What was my grandmother doing? What was my community doing? If you look at all traditional communities, we have summer food, we have winter food, because seasons के हिसाब से बहुत सालों से सब evolve होके culturally develop हुआ है. So those are some of the measures we will have to go back to. And I don't mean here by being rigid and going back to that only and not accommodating the modern, but finding a balance between the modern and not looking down on what was traditional or what is traditional and has evolved over a millennia, right? So finding the balance between them. Sorry यार वंशिका, बहुत लंबा आंसर हो गया.
No, it's very nice. Thank you. It's very thought-provoking.
Actually, before we come back to the room, there are two on the chat. One is on hydroponic farming. If you look at the last two questions, we'll take either or all of them. And then one question is in the room.
Right. So Priya, hydroponics, my take is that I, like a lot of farmers around the world, we don't consider hydroponics as organic farming. It's a chemical farming, because पानी के अंदर आपको न्यूट्रिएंट्स डालने पड़ते हैं और वो न्यूट्रिएंट्स आपके प्लांट्स को ग्रो करने में हेल्प करते हैं. There's only certain varieties of plants that you can grow with hydroponics. आप सब कुछ तो नहीं उगा सकते हैं hydroponics से. So yes, hydroponics is a method of growing food, but a lot of farmers went to court in the US when Donald Trump approved it as an organic method, saying that nahi, we don't want hydroponics to be part of the organic acceptance level. So मेरा भी मानना उनके साथ वही है, प्रिया. Can food forest communities within vicinity start? Absolutely, absolutely. I believe that Indians have a way of doing food forests for a long time. I mean, food forest नाम बहुत fancy लगता है, लेकिन श्रेया जी अगर आप देखेंगे तो जो कॉमन प्रॉपर्टी एरियाज होते हैं ना, गौचर जिसको बोलते हैं, हर गांव के बाहर एक गौचर होता था। अब तो सब सरकार ने बेच दिया इंडस्ट्रीज को। तो ये गौचर एक फूड फॉरेस्ट जैसा ही था कि जो लैंडलेस लोग हैं, जो एनिमल्स वाले लोग हैं, तो उनके लिए एक स्पेस होती है। अगर आप देखेंगे तो बहुत सारे लोग ऑल ओवर इंडिया, ऑल ओवर वर्ल्ड से ये ऐसी जो स्पेसेस है जो अनयूटिलाइज्ड है, उसको फिर से ऐसे फूड फॉरेस्ट करके चालू कर रहे हैं। ऑनलाइन एक मूवमेंट है जिसको फूड इज फ्री करके है। तो ये ग्रुप ऐसा मानता है कि खाना हमारा एक ह्यूमन राइट है, एंड उसके लिए किसी को तकलीफ नहीं होनी चाहिए, किसी को भूखा नहीं रहना चाहिए। तो वो लोग गुरिल्ला गार्डनिंग करते हैं। गुरिल्ला गार्डनिंग मतलब आपके घर के वो रात को आके आपके लिए एक अच्छा सा फूड फॉरेस्ट बना के चले जाएंगे। या फिर कोई ऐसा कम्युनिटी है जहाँ पे लोगों को फ्रेश खाना नहीं मिलता है, तो वो जाके वहां रात को खाना, फ्रेश वेजिटेबल्स और वो सब दे देंगे। तो it's a way of showing कि food is a medium that connects us and food should be free for everyone. तो food forest communities तो एकदम ही हो सकती है और होनी भी चाहिए। बहुत मजा आएगा उनको करने में।
Thank you, Purvi ji.
Thank you.
The next question we'll take it from you.
हेलो,
हाँ जी। हाँ
मेरा नाम बलजिंदर है और मेरा क्वेश्चन है कि पंजाब में ग्रीन रेवोल्यूशन से पहले और ग्रीन रेवोल्यूशन के बाद दो इराज हैं। तो पहले जो था ग्रीन रेवोल्यूशन के साथ जब रिश्ता नहीं था तो लोगों का एक कल्चर जुड़ा हुआ था फार्मिंग से, फॉर एग्जांपल कनक है, मिलेट्स हैं, सबसे, है ना। तो उसके बाद ग्रीन रेवोल्यूशन के बाद मार्केट आ गई तो सबका कल्चर उस वजह से बदल गया, लोगों की नेसेसिटीज बदल गई। तो अब ग्राउंड में क्या है कि बहुत से लोग मेन स्ट्रीम में ऑर्गेनिक फार्मिंग को लाना चाहते हैं। तो दिक्कत क्या है कि जैसे सिक्किम की आप बात कर रहे हो, अलग अलग लोग ऑर्गेनिक फार्म कर रहे हैं, लेकिन पार्टिकुलर रीजन के लिए पार्टिकुलर वहाँ पे सोयल होती है, वहाँ पे पार्टिकुलर वाटर का है, और जो वहाँ पे मौसम है वो भी उसी तरीके से है। तो जो किसान हैं वो इधर उधर से मतलब फार्म्स में जाके अपनी नॉलेज को इकट्ठा करते हैं और शुरू कर देते हैं, क्योंकि कुछ किसान हैं जिनके पास सफिशिएंट रिसोर्सेज हैं। तो मैं बहुत सारे ऐसे फार्म्स को मिला हूँ, लेकिन वो एक फेलियर, एक लेवल के बाद वो फेलियर हो जाता है। इमोशनली आप उसको शुरू कर लेते हैं, मिट्टी को बचाना है, हम ये कर सकते हैं, हमारे लिए फूड अच्छा चाहिए। लेकिन क्या मैं ये पूछना चाहता हूँ कि ऐसी कोई संस्थाएं हैं जहाँ पे इस तरीके की इंफॉर्मेशन, ऑथेंटिक इंफॉर्मेशन मिल सके, कि अगर कोई जैसे स्टूडेंट, अगर मैं करना चाहता हूँ ऑर्गेनिक फार्मिंग अपने एरियाज में, तो मुझे कहाँ से हेल्प मिल सकती है, और क्या गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से कोई सहायता दी जाती है इस इंफॉर्मेशन को कलेक्ट करने में, कोई कोर्सेज हैं? तो ये था मेरा।
तो आपका सवाल बहुत बढ़िया है, और मैं आपको ये बताना चाहती हूँ कि ये जो फार्मर्स स्टॉप करते हैं ना, वो अपनी गलती से या उनकी कोई ना Mohammed ji, help me here, not for the lack of knowledge. They don't fail because of lack of knowledge. पर ऑर्गेनिक फार्मिंग को ट्रांजिशन करने के लिए समय चाहिए होता है। जब हम केमिकल्स बहुत यूज करते हैं, सॉइल मर जाती है, उसमें जो जीवाणु होते हैं जो हमारे क्रॉप्स को करते हैं वो मर जाते हैं। तो सॉइल को जीवंत करने में 3 से 4 साल लगते हैं, और ये 3 से 4 साल बहुत कठिन होते हैं, क्योंकि आपको बहुत सारा ऑर्गेनिक मैटर खर्चा करना पड़ता है, ऑर्गेनिक मैटर सॉइल में डालना पड़ता है, मजदूरी थोड़ी बढ़ जाती है और आपका प्रोडक्शन कम हो जाता है। तो ये जो ट्रांजिशन, उसको ट्रांजिशन पीरियड बोलते हैं, जब हम केमिकल से ऑर्गेनिक तरफ जाते हैं। तो ये ट्रांजिशन पीरियड किसानों को अकेले कर पाना या करना फाइनेंशियली वायबल नहीं है। इसके 2 ऑप्शंस है। जो हमारे एरिया में जो मैं करती हूँ, वो हम उसको कम्युनिटी सपोर्टेड एग्रीकल्चर कहते हैं। कि सपोजिंग आपकी 5 बीघा जमीन है, ठीक है, आपको ऑर्गेनिक की तरफ शिफ्ट करना है, तो हम आपको क्या कहेंगे कि 5 बीघा मत करो, आप पहले 1 से चालू करो, छोटा छोटा 1 पे आप देखो कैसे कर रहे हो, सिस्टम समझो, क्या आपके पास एक्सपेक्टेशंस है वो समझो, और फिर धीरे धीरे 5 को कन्वर्ट करो। उस समय जब आप ट्रांजिशन कर रहे हो ऑर्गेनिक फार्मिंग में, तब हम आपको कस्टमर्स के साथ कनेक्ट करते हैं, क्योंकि अभी हमारे यहाँ ऐसी कोई देखिए खेती स्टेट इश्यू है, राइट, तो हर स्टेट का अलग अलग अप्रोच होता है फार्मिंग में। जैसे सिक्किम है, सिक्किम ने डिसाइड किया कि हम ऑर्गेनिक जाएंगे, और सिक्किम के लिए इजी भी रहेगा क्योंकि ग्रीन रेवोल्यूशन इतना पहुंचा नहीं था सिक्किम, राइट। ग्रीन रेवोल्यूशन को इफेक्टिव होने के लिए इरिगेशन चाहिए, जमीन लेवल चाहिए, तो और ट्रांसपोर्टेशन फैसिलिटीज चाहिए कि जहां आप सामान बेच सकते हो, ला सकते हो। तो बहुत सारे जो हिली एरियाज था वहां ग्रीन रेवोल्यूशन पहुंचा ही नहीं है, राइट। तो वो लोग बाय डिफॉल्ट बहुत तरह से ऑर्गेनिक है, तो सिक्किम को ऑर्गेनिक कन्वर्जन में इजी होता है। तो वो
Purvi, you can shift to English also.
राइट
Maybe he's conversing in English, but the question he poses in Hindi.
Right. So you can understand that for Sikkim to convert to organic was considerably easy because a lot of areas Green Revolution hadn't reached there itself. Now, if you want to do it in Punjab, you will require a lot of support. What you will require to see is, does Punjab have an organic farming policy? The organic farming policy will have certain subsidies and certain help available to the farmer. But usually even this is not enough to help the farmer to transition to organic. And what I have realized is when communities work together, when you and I work together, so today I want healthy food and you want to organic. So you create a community around you and say कि भैया मैं try कर रहा हूँ, मेरे को organic करना है, मेरा सामान, मेरा जो खाना उग के आएगा वो 100% ऑर्गेनिक नहीं है, पर मैं आपको गारंटी देता हूँ इसमें मैं कोई दवाई और जहर नहीं डालने वाला हूँ, राइट। एंड सो देन आई बाय फ्रॉम यू एंड वी क्रिएट अ कम्युनिटी वेयर बाय आई सपोर्ट यू फॉर द ट्रांजिशन फ्रॉम ऑर्गेनिक। तो ऐसे बहुत सारे लोकल सॉल्यूशंस लोगों ने इवॉल्व किए हैं टू हेल्प पीपल। टेक्निकल इंफॉर्मेशन तो आपको चाहिए इतनी मिल जाएगी, टेक्निकल इंफॉर्मेशन की कोई कमी नहीं है। प्रॉब्लम मार्केट और फार्मर्स को जो सपोर्ट चाहिए होता है उसका होता है। तो उसके लिए आपको एक कम्युनिटी, आपको अवेयरनेस क्रिएट करनी पड़ेगी। अपने फैमिली से स्टार्ट कीजिए, फिर नेबर्स से स्टार्ट कीजिए और उस तरह से एक कम्युनिटी डेवलप करके फिर ये एक्सप्लोर कीजिए, क्योंकि सिर्फ नॉलेज इनफ नहीं है, पैसा भी चाहिए, सस्टेन भी करना पड़ेगा 4 साल तक। तो बहुत सारे परम्यूटेशन कॉम्बिनेशंस फार्मर के अगेंस्ट जाते हैं जब वो ट्रांजिशन करना चाहते हैं। Does that answer your question?
मेरा एक और थोड़ा नोशन मैंने क्लियर करना था। जैसे कहा जाता है कि जैसे आपने सिक्किम की बात की, अगर मैं अपने एरिया में ऑर्गेनिक फार्म कर रहा हूँ तो सभी लोग पेस्टिसाइड का यूज़ कर रहे हैं, तो जो इंसेक्ट्स हैं, ये बोला जाता है कि जब सारे जो इंसेक्ट्स हैं वो अपने खेत में आ जाते हैं,
right.
तो इस तरीके का कुछ होता है, मतलब इसका कोई के समय के साथ ये भी
नहीं, उसमें क्या होता है, एक लिविंग फेंस जैसा बनाना होता है जब आप ऑर्गेनिक फार्मिंग करते हैं। ये एक दूसरा प्रॉब्लम है क्योंकि इंडिया में हमारी जमीन इतनी ज्यादा नहीं होती है और हमारे आजू बाजू बहुत सारे लोग केमिकल फार्मिंग करते हैं, तो हमारा पानी का सोर्स भी एक है। तो मतलब जो प्योर जो वेस्टर्न आइडिया है ऑर्गेनिक फार्मिंग का, उस पे हम शायद ना पहुंच पाए, लेकिन काफी ऐसी सिस्टम्स है जैसे आप प्लांट्स, लिविंग फेंस, तो मतलब आप ऐसे प्लांट्स अपने खेत के आजू बाजू उगा सकते हैं जो केमिकल्स वो लोग स्प्रे करेंगे वो एब्जॉर्ब कर ले। फिर आपको ऐसे कंपेनियन प्लांट्स उगा सकते हैं जो आपको कीड़ों को अट्रैक्ट करे, जो कीड़े आपके क्रॉप को खा जाने वाले हैं वो उसमें चले जाए और आपको ना अटैक करे। नेचुरल वेज है, फेरोमोन ट्रैप्स है, लाइट ट्रैप्स है। तो मतलब ये स्लो प्रोसेस है। जैसे हम केमिकल फार्मिंग फास्ट फूड जैसा है, यूरिया की बैग खोली, फेंका, खत्म हो गया, नाइट्रोजन मिल गया, ग्रोथ हो गया। इसमें आपको गोबर लेना पड़ेगा, उसको सड़ाना पड़ेगा, प्लांट लीव्स लेने पड़ेंगे, कंपोस्ट करना पड़ेगा, आपको दवाई बनानी पड़ेगी। तो ये प्रोसेस खाना बनाने जैसा है कि भाई गेहूं लिया, फिर उसमें चक्की में आटा दिया, फिर रोटी बनाई। तो ये पूरा काम भी बढ़ जाता है। तो बहुत सारी एंगल्स से किसान को सपोर्ट चाहिए जब वो है। सिर्फ पैसे और नॉलेज इनफ नहीं होता है, उसको मोटिवेशन भी चाहिए, इमोशनल सपोर्ट भी चाहिए, कम्युनिटी सपोर्ट भी चाहिए, कंज्यूमर सपोर्ट भी चाहिए। तो ये जब सारे पैरामीटर्स सेट हो जाते हैं तो बहुत इजी होता है ट्रांजिशन।
मैम ऑल्सो एक चीज इसी में एक पॉइंट पे जोड़ते हुए, मुझे जो आपने अभी कहा कि ये पूरा एक हेक्टिक प्रोसेस होता है, apart from that, if we look into the process and the effort that an individual is putting in, but is it that it compared to the others इसमें थोड़ा सा yield भी low होता है? There's a low yield due
नहीं,
to which
वो एक assumption, वो एक narrative build हो गया है, right?
okay.
थोड़े साल पहले, 3 या 4 साल, जब when the soil is recovering, हम जब बीमार होते हैं तो हमें दवाई की जरूरत पड़ती है, right? So when the soil is recovering, yes, थोड़ा प्रोडक्शन में प्रॉब्लम होगा, लेकिन जैसे जैसे सॉइल हेल्दी हो जाएगी, जैसे आपकी इकोसिस्टम क्रिएट होगी। रोडेल इंस्टीट्यूट करके एक इंस्टीट्यूट है अमेरिका में, जिसका सबसे पुराना ऑर्गेनिक और केमिकल का साथ में रिसर्च है, 40 या 40 to 45 years. So the oldest and the longest research they've done, and they found that in times of say drought or floods or an environmental hazard, it's the organic that always does well compared to chemical, right? क्योंकि chemical एक फैक्ट्री के आइडिया में बंद हुआ है ना, तो उसको सारे पैरामीटर्स चाहिए, उसमें से कोई भी चेंज होगा तो वो परफॉर्म नहीं करेगा। और जो ऑर्गेनिक है वो एक नेचुरल इकोसिस्टम में है, तो अगर बारिश बहुत हो गई तो भी वो परफॉर्म करेगा। तो ये एक दूसरी देन है ग्रीन रेवोल्यूशन की, कि हम खेती का सक्सेस सिर्फ मेजर करते हैं प्रोडक्शन से, राइट? तो हम न्यूट्रिशन को अब नहीं देखते हैं, हम एस्थेटिक्स देखते हैं खाने के, कि भाई टमाटर बड़ा है, फिर उसको एथिलीन गैस से लाल किया है, वो नहीं देखते। टमाटर बड़ा है, उसका न्यूट्रिशन क्या है, नहीं। तो यही मैं बोल रही हूँ कि हमें खाने और उसका नजरिया बदलने की जरूरत है। हमारा रिलेशनशिप जो खाने के साथ है उसको थोड़ा बदलने की जरूरत है। तो बस यही बात है।
Okay, do we have other question? Okay, we don't have any from the room. On the chat, on the Zoom, if you have a question, you can unmute yourself and ठीक है पूर्वी जी, I think ये last question था, so thank you so much for joining. And as you said, that we have just scratched the surface, and there is a lot more to talk about.
Absolutely.
So there's one person has come up, so we'll wait for the vote of thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to help. Happy to help.
हमारे यहाँ पे एक ना मूवमेंट चला था मिलेट्स के लिए।
हाँ जी।
खेती विरासत मिशन करके एक संस्था है पंजाब में, तो उन्होंने मिलेट्स के लिए किसानों को प्रोत्साहित किया। तो बहुत से किसानों ने मिलेट्स उगाए, लेकिन मिलेट्स के ऊपर ना एक छिलका होता है पतला सा, जैसे धान है उसके ऊपर छिलका, उसको ऐसे नहीं खा सकते। तो अब मैं मान लो काफ़ी किसानों से मिला हूँ, जो कंगनी है, जहाँ रागी है, बहुत से किसानों के पास वो पड़ी हुई हैं। लेकिन यहाँ नॉर्थ में दिक्कत ये है कि वो छिलका उतारने वाली मशीन है जो, वो काफ़ी कॉस्टली है। तो बहुत से जैसे ऐसा कोई ग्रुप्स नहीं है, तो वो कहाँ से उनको हेल्प हो सकती है जी, मतलब ये प्रॉब्लम है यहाँ पे?
मैं है ना एक मिलेट का ग्रुप है पूरा। मिलेट का तो एक दूसरा इश्यू ये भी है कि 2 चीज हो गई है मिलेट के साथ। एक तो हम भूल गए मिलेट को कैसे खाए। हमें बेस्ट से अब पता चला है, क्योंकि अब बेस्ट मिलेट को सुपर फूड समझने लगा है, तो हम मिलेट्स को अब देखने लगे हैं। तो हम बहुत सारे तो भूल गए हैं कि मिलेट्स को कैसे खाएं। और दूसरा है ये है कि जो लोग मिलेट्स उगाते हैं तो वो उनको कोर्स ग्रेन या जाड़ा मोटा धान की तरह से देखते हैं। तो मिलेट्स में ये भी एक प्रॉब्लम है। लेकिन जो आप प्रोसेसिंग की बात कर रहे हैं वो तो 100% है। एक मिलेट्स का पैन इंडिया ग्रुप है जो बहुत सारा यही इश्यूज को सॉल्व करने की ट्राई कर रहा है। तो मैं मोहम्मद जी को उस ग्रुप का लिंक भेजूंगी, तो वो आपके साथ शेयर कर सकते हैं और आप उनको वो ये क्वेश्चन पोज कर सकते हैं। आई एम श्योर ऐसा कोई मिलेट्स वाला बंदा पंजाब में होगा जो आपको वहां से वो ग्रुप में से मिल जाएगा और हेल्प कर सकता है। बहुत सारी यही ग्रुप में बहुत सारे लोग हैं जिन्होंने ऐसी मशीन्स डिजाइन और डेवलप की है, यही रीजन से कि भाई धान कैसे उसको करा जाए। तो वो आपको मिल जाएगा, टचवुड मिल जाएगा, उसमें से कोई ना कोई तो मिल जाएगा आपको वहां से। तो मैं मोहम्मद जी के साथ वो ग्रुप का एड्रेस और लिंक शेयर कर दूंगी।
Okay, thank you so much.
हाँ जी।
Purvi ji, we don't want you to go.
I just have one more question. That like
I love
organic
questions. I'm happy to be here. बताइए.
Yeah, so organic farming and natural farming are sometimes used as synonymously.
Right.
But I think there's a difference, matlab, but like, can you just talk about it?
Absolutely. Now see, organic farming there's 2 approaches to organic farming. One is the replacement method, that you replace the chemicals with natural inputs and you can still call yourself an organic farmer. And organic farming, natural farming rather, would look at the ecosystem, look at replacement, at how the farm functions, what are the different elements it needs, what are the different elements it requires. And so I think the critical difference between the two would be, one is a simplistic replacement method and the other is a holistic ecosystem view of looking at farming.
All right, thank you.
Purvi ji, before we end the session, I would request you to share a few readings or books.
Absolutely. So there are different areas. So if you're interested in purely agriculture, then you have Fukuoka's One Straw Revolution. Wendell Berry, an American farmer and a writer, writes beautifully on farming. If you want to understand the food system and how we got there, Michael Pollan and his Omnivore's Dilemma is a very good book. If you want to understand the politics of food and how food laws around the world are made, and especially made in the US and then rest of the world kind of replicates and follows their path. India does the same. The FSSAI kind of goes by what the USDA does. So Marion Nestle's book on food politics is a good book. If you want to understand processed food, then there is a book by Michael Moss which is called Salt, Sugar and Fat. If you want to understand the fast food like McDonald's and Burger King and all of that, Eric Schossler's Fast Food Nation is a very good book to read. If you want to issues like food, the role of World Trade Center, World Trade Organization in food and farming, Raj Patel is a good person to read. He has many books, but one of his most famous books is Stuffed and Starved. I can send you a reading list, Mohammed ji, if you like. A film and a reading list is what I can send to you. So people can pick and choose, because there's many areas. There's some purely farming, then some economics, some food, some, traditional, some food sovereignty, so seeds pe hai, so, Vandana Shiva, if you want to understand Indian context and the Green Revolution, Vandana Shiva is good to go to. She writes very well. So, bahut sare hai. The world of food is fantastic and complex and, fascinating. It can solve a lot of larger than life problems.
Sure. So thank you, Purvi ji. And before our participants leave the meeting, one, I was going to share about that you had shared a couple of links to movies, which
Right.
they can, like shorter movies, which people can watch right after this session. And I would also request people who are there on the Zoom to register for Purvi ji's residential workshop at Sambhavna. That's going to happen somewhere at the end of September. So we can have all these discussions over the course of 5 days too. So yes, and one more thing, because we had sent, like, there were 2 Zoom sessions back to back. So tomorrow we are going to talk about more on the limits to growth and energy. That's at 8 p.m., 8 July. So thank you everyone for joining in, and thank you, Purvi ji, for this wonderful session. And I hope to meet you soon when we have the residential program.
Done. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.